love that H bomb at the end there. You and me someday, buddy. All right. Hey, it's Provoked, the number one news show on all of Apple. How do you like that? With me, your host, Scott Horton, and him, your host, the great martyr made Daryl Cooper. Hey, how are you doing?
Good, good. I am running a little bit low on sleep. I've been up for about 32 hours, but I am ready to go.
Great. So the big news is you are doing the first live episode of the new Tucker Carlson show tonight, and the special subject everybody's like waiting on the edge of their seats um, is Jeffrey Epstein. And you're a deep dive. Now you did, I thought it was three. Turns out it's what, closer to 5 hour podcast? It's just three parts
Yeah.
is what I was thinking of. Deep dive into the Jeffrey Epstein story. We talked about it in some depth here last week. And so, but this is the big one. This is the one that really counts and is absolutely certain to get more than 1 million views on just YouTube alone, never mind on X and the rest. So, my first question for you, sir, is do you have your shit together and are you ready to do a good job?
I'm ready. I think my IQ is about 84 right now due to my lack of sleep, and I still think I've prepared enough to get the job done. Honestly, there's a lot of people out there who would be better at this than I am, like this particular topic. But I did a good podcast series on it, and so they wanted me, and I'm going to go out there and do my best, try not to let people down.
Yeah, I'm sure you can do great, man. I know from anyone who's listened to your podcast, we know what a good story you can tell when you have your notes and have your wits about you there. Um,
Yeah, I
I
mean, and it's interesting, right? Because the universe has just been conspiring basically over the last couple weeks to make this show as big as it can possibly be. I mean, I'm sitting there just praying, please, Mr. President, please don't stop the schizophrenic text wall posts on Truth Social. Just keep it up for another week.
yeah, boy, it really is something else the way that he's done that. I guess the last one that I saw, he's really essentially saying, to paraphrase, you either love me or you want to know more about this story. You can't have it both ways. and and if you do want to know more about this story, then you're my former supporter and burn in hell too. Basically, don't want to know you. That doesn't seem like it can last. And then you were telling me right before we went on that there's, I don't know, breaking news. Maybe it will be breaking by the time this posts. I guess the Tucker interview will be already over, and it'll be the aftermath. So we'll see about that. But there is news supposedly coming, I guess, as we're recording this on Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, Mark Halperin, who, like you said, it's not exactly news yet. It's just him talking. But Mark Halperin's one of those guys that when he says it, it's usually there's usually some fire behind the smoke. And he says that a major newspaper, one of the top three in the country, so I assume New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, are going to do an expose on Trump's relationship with Epstein, and that he thinks and he's hearing that that has something to do with how the White House has been handling this issue over the last couple weeks. And so we'll see if that pans out. It might just be a rehash of known information, but we'll see, because it's really strange, man. It's like I'm I've been racking my brain trying to figure out, like, what are the explanations for this particular turn in the narrative. It would be one thing for them to be coming out and saying, okay, look, there's stuff in here that there's people who met with Epstein who they didn't do anything bad, but we don't want to put their names out there because now they're a pedophile for the rest of their life to at least some people, and they didn't do anything, and we don't want to do that. If they were pushing a line kind of like that, I think people could at least understand where they were coming from or try to figure out what they were about. But this, where they're coming out all of a sudden after never ever taking this approach before, saying that this is another Russiagate hoax, that the files were created by Obama and Biden and Comey and all these people who hate Trump and everything, and for that to happen so abruptly, um, very hard to understand how or why that would happen.
Yeah. I mean, they're clearly reaching there. I mean, that one even sounds like Trump just came up with that line on the fly because nobody
I don't think I've heard
understands.
anybody else say it.
I'm sorry?
I don't think I've heard anybody else say it. I could have
No, of
missed
course
it,
not.
but
Because the Russiagate hoax clearly was manufactured by, first of all, the CIA and the FBI, and then in collusion with the Democrats and the media. And the whole thing was about parsing out all of these kind of rumors that just wait, once all this is confirmed, it's really going to be meaningful. You're just going to have to wait a few years. And we promise we're going to get there someday, kind of a thing. And it was clearly them doing it to him. But
yeah.
who
And
thinks
then
that that's the
then
history of the Epstein story? That's where this comes from. That the CIA made this up just to try to hurt the Republicans or something. Everybody knows Bill Clinton was the guy's best friend and all that. You know?
yeah, the Russiagate story, there was like a flip side to that too, and this ties in very indirectly to the Epstein thing, and it's something that it seems to me at least that a lot of people, maybe just Trump himself, some of the people around him might get it, but he's the boss, just don't fully understand. Is like you said, it was the Russiagate thing was always just wait a little bit longer. It's coming. There's a huge thing here. We're going to get to it, and it never came. And everybody remembers when they finally pulled Robert Mueller into Congress and sat him down and had him answer questions, and it became clear immediately. Even you had David Axelrod saying, this is a total disaster. You had Democrats panicking because they had just spent the last 2 years promoting this guy as the savior of the republic and the Russia collusion thing as the greatest crime since Benedict Arnold. And it became very obvious playing on live national TV that the guy that is in charge of this has no idea what's going on. He has no answers to basic questions. And for those of us who had been following it, really closely up to that point, it was very cathartic because we knew that this whole thing was ridiculous. It didn't make sense on its face. And when that finally happened, a lot of us naive morons like me, who no matter how many times our faith is kicked down in the dirt and like stomped on by the U.S. government in the media, we still come back up and hopeful and naive for the next time it comes around. We were like, okay, now there's going to be a reckoning here. Okay, after this Mueller disaster, and now it's clear to everybody that this thing is a big joke and there's nothing here. Man, the media, there's going to be a reckoning. All these politicians, the Adam Schiffs of the world, they're not going to survive this. I mean, and then it was just no. Actually, it's fine. It's no big deal. They just got caught framing the president for treason, and not just like a little cabal of people, but the intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies, congressional Democrats, some Republicans, the entire mainstream media basically got caught. I mean, red handed what they were doing, and nothing happened. And so, Epstein, the way this ties into Epstein, and the thing that it seems to me like Trump just doesn't fully understand is that, Epstein has kind of become a proxy for just elite and deep state lack of accountability overall. And he's sort of like, whether we can hold him, well, he's been held accountable obviously, but like whether we can put that story out there and get just all the information on all the people who are involved and all the agencies that may have been until we can get a full accounting on that, people take it as you know the all the rhetoric about holding the deep state accountable and all this that goes all the way back to Russiagate and long before, obviously, that's all really just a joke. That's just not going to happen. If you can't do it here on an issue where we're not talking about, they'll invoke national security reasons for, it was shocking that they even pulled that line. You want to know, like, okay, so you're telling us this guy has nothing to do with intelligence agencies. There's nothing to see here, and yet, if we tell you any more about him, it'll compromise national security. It makes no sense on its face. But that if we can't do this for a guy who was a predator of children, this isn't something the CIA did in some other country trying to overthrow a government. We need to maintain relations. I mean, this is something that is so fundamentally evil to the vast majority of people in the country that if we can't draw a line in the sand here, then people question whether we can draw it anywhere.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. It is. It's going to come to a head. And we do know that Donald Trump was friends with this guy for a very long time until they had a falling out. And I know that part of the story was it was supposedly that Epstein was hitting on a girl at Mar-a-Lago that worked there, but then it was also a fight over a piece of real estate or something. I don't know exactly the whole story there, but they were friends for a long time. Trump obviously
Yeah.
was a womanizer. That doesn't necessarily mean he's willing to cross those kind of lines with this guy, or that there would be necessarily that there would still be proof that he ever did after all this time in the time since they were buddies or whatever. But he does seem to be really worried about it. And
Yeah. And
my interpretation was, yeah, it's obviously he's covering for Israel. But then again, I wanted to bring this up because this is, but we shouldn't spend the whole day on Epstein here today because you're going to kill it tonight on Tucker, and we covered it last week. But I did want to bring up to you, and I sent you this link, was a story at Wired where they got the cell phone location data from, I'm not exactly sure, a couple of years worth, I think, in a row, and showing all the thousands of people going in and out of that island, and people from all over the country, including people from Austin, Texas, including a lot of fancy pants places like Aspen, Colorado, and Martha's Vineyard, and all of these kinds of things. And showing, they have a little thing. They show, here's where they would get off at the dock. They would either take the boat over there, or they would take the helicopter over there, and then you see all of these people, and then you would even just show, here's the people at the temple, here are the people just hanging out at the beach and whatever. So, I mean, it's just an open question to me. I'm not the expert on this story. I wish I had spent some time learning this stuff, but the obvious question is like, just how widespread was the reputation of this island as get away with murder island versus, oh yeah, just this guy has a nice place with a nice beach or what, you know what I mean? But you have a lot of elite people going there. And as you said on the show last week, his plane was called the Lolita Express, and everybody knew what that meant and all of that. It's easy for me to just assume the worst. Bill Clinton was seen there by people. They must have been raping children. I don't know. But obviously, you could see from there, Israel aside, just you could have some major proportion of what we call our ruling classes in this country, politicians and business and banking and media and whoever, implicated in some way with this, and including even hanging out with a guy who already had been convicted, right? And was already should have been,
yeah.
having
Yeah.
a scarlet letter around his neck. And instead, people are still partying with this guy all over the place. So raises real
Yeah.
questions.
And,
And
and
the
they,
volume of
they,
people, I was a bit surprised by the volume of people in and out of that place. I didn't really realize.
yeah, it's amazing, honestly. I mean, you can understand like maybe when he's bringing in some rando celebrity or MIT physics professor or something, and they're not doing background checks on this guy. Like they were recommended by somebody else. Hey, this guy wants to meet you. He's a billionaire. He funds a lot of like research and stuff. You should go meet him. And they're like, oh, cool. And they go meet him. That's fine. But the idea of people like, Ehud Barak claimed he had no idea
Oh,
what Epstein had done, nothing. He didn't know anything about his past or anything about his crimes. He heard that he got like busted for prostitution. That was about it. It's like, dude, you're the former head of Israeli defense intelligence. Like, what are you talking about? Come on. Or Bill Clinton's people, like if I requested a meeting with Bill Clinton, I'm pretty sure someone in his on his staff is going to say you can't meet with that guy, boss. We did a Google search.
right.
Um, and I
And
mean,
Bill was like, "Oh no, I like what came up in that Google search. He's a friend of ours." Yeah.
yeah, so it's just totally implausible, and I think it's again ridiculous on its face when somebody like Ehud Barak or Clinton tries to take that line. They just had no idea, because for people who are younger or who were just not kind of following this story back then, this was a big story. It wasn't a big story like it was on the front page of the New York Times kind of thing, but it was on the society pages. Like people knew who Jeffrey Epstein was. He'd had profiles written up of him in magazines and newspapers before for a long time. And then this happens, and it was a big story, huge story in Florida, but big story in New York, and people across the country. And in those circles, everybody knew what happened. It
Mm.
was not, again, to go back to what I said last week, he didn't give his plane the nickname the Lolita Express. Other people gave it that nickname because everybody knew what was going on. And so, there's something to be said. I mean, so to last thing maybe, and we'll move on to something else. But the thing with Trump, like from what I understand, is his relationship with him ended in like the late 1990s, basically, when they had that incident that everybody talks about where he supposedly had him banned from Mar-a-Lago for flirting with one of the regulars' daughters or something like that. And they had that real estate dispute. Wexner wanted a piece of property that was next to Mar-a-Lago, and he had Epstein sort of on that job getting it for him, and Trump won that battle to get it for himself and expand Mar-a-Lago. And so they had a falling out. But from what I understand, this was all long before, years before any of the the really bad stuff came out. You have that quote from Trump saying that Epstein likes him young, but that could mean anything. Bruce Wayne likes him young too. So it doesn't necessarily mean he knew he was committing crimes, but I don't know, man. I find it very hard to believe that Trump would be, it's kind of the same thing with Clinton. Like they kind of both strike me as the type that, yeah, okay, maybe, you could rope him into a place and tell him she's 19, but she's actually 16, and now we got you, the kind of thing. But a lot of the stuff that Epstein was doing with these 14, 13, 12-year-olds, like they just, I have trouble believing that fits, the personality type, but people are surprised sometimes. But anyway, we'll see, man. I mean, I'll tell you this, that if it would have, if there was something serious out there about Trump, you really do think it would have come out before now. The idea that they went,
because it could have been in his FBI file without being in Epstein's, or without even having to be relying on Epstein's evidence. You just go to what they already would have had on Trump, that subject was seen doing this or that in 1987 or 1994 or whatever, right?
Right. And people say like, oh, well, but that would incriminate other people. It's like, dude, in the first Trump administration and during the Biden administration, they had control of what got released, how it got released, how it was reported on, everything. They had total lockdown of
1,000 FBI leaks against him. They leaked against him over and over again. They wouldn't stop.
So they could have selectively done that in a way. I mean, so I don't know. I find it very hard to believe that there's something really, really bad and incriminating in there.
You know what? Even though, like, when Maxwell was sentenced, he was like, "Well, I wish her well. Good luck, lady, and please don't say anything bad about." You know what I mean? Like, there's seems to be, and he's not a drinker, so seems like he would remember pretty clearly. I don't know.
And
who knows? Who knows?
There was a lawyer for the victims who was trying to talk to a lot of different people related to the case and who knew about the case around West Palm Beach and people who knew Epstein. Trump was one of the few people who agreed to talk to him. He gave him, apparently, according to the attorney, as much time as the guy wanted, was very open, forthcoming, very helpful.
Right. I read that.
And so, we'll see about the Trump connection. I mean, some people have been suggesting out there, I think I saw Glenn Beck put this out there. Jesse Kelly talked about it yesterday, they're floating this theory that the reason for the abrupt 180 on Trump's rhetoric about this issue is that there is actually something in there about him, but it was planted in there as a poison pill, basically to keep him from releasing the file or to incriminate him for failing to release it. Who knows? It's all speculation, obviously, but the story is not going away. As much as they wanted to, this story, they cannot push this story down, I don't think. There's too much public interest in it, and we're going to see how it develops.
Well, listen, especially because this episode is going to come out on Friday, even though we're recording this before the Tucker interview itself is going to be the news on Friday. So enough about Epstein. Let's talk about you. Is it true that you are to the right of Elmo?
I've seen the Elmo thing mentioned. I don't know the context of that. I've been kind of out of the loop,
but said anti-Semitic stuff. It was a joke for people who get it. But listen, it wasn't that funny because I didn't deliver it well. But the point is this, that Eric Wemple, who's the media critic and corrector of falsity over there at the Washington Post, who I got to give him some credit. He's done decent things in some circumstances. His after-the-fact recap of Russiagate is worth looking at over there. But anyway, he had a piece, Why Tucker Carlson is Still Relevant, where, hey, my name got in there as an example of the kind of kook he's interviewing nowadays. And then in the link to, and also is, I think he used the word flirting with or whatever, is Tucker's somehow connection and association with Holocaust denial was a link to an article about your last appearance on that show. Now, my last appearance on that show was a week or two ago there, and you were brought up, and I tried to defend you as you told me someone mentioned to you. I threw you under the bus a little bit because I said that possibly the way that you phrased it, you left yourself open to misunderstanding, and I tried to defend you best I could as far as what I understood what you meant by all of that. So I'm sure this will come up during the Tucker interview tonight because they are going to try to make this about you in whatever ways. So I just wondered whether you thought the media critic over there, the media corrector, the fact checker over there. No, that's Glenn Kessler. This is the fact checker of the fact checker, Eric Wemple at the Washington Post. Is he right about you? What do people need to know about who you are and what you are and why you say and do the things that you do, Mr. Cooper?
Well, I have to confess, I haven't read it. I don't read negative stuff about myself on the internet. I just ignore it. And
Well, you remember what happened last October.
yeah, but no. So I'm not a Holocaust denier, and he has no basis for saying that. I I've been urged by people who know a little bit about this the topic to pursue court cases against a lot of these publications that have said that, just because they cannot, like, if they want to call me an anti-Semite, a racist, a bigot, just pick your kind of your evil noun. Then you can get into court, and that's kind of well, this is how we interpreted like what he said here. Like, to us, this is racist, this is anti-Semitic, and that's really hard to prove. But they say you're a Holocaust denier. They're accusing you of a crime in several countries, and those have legal definitions that are consistent enough across many countries that that you can actually pull those up and use them in court as a reference point. And they can't find anything anywhere where I've ever denied or downplayed the Holocaust, because I never have done that, because I don't think that. Um, and in fact, you can go to my podcast, and there's hours and hours of me describing the Holocaust in gory detail and how horrible and awful it was. So, it's slander sometimes. Other times, it's just ignorance. I'm sure Wemple, like, I don't blame a lot of these people, like some of the historians who came out, the Neil Fergusons and Victor Davis Hansons and stuff, the guys who are probably perfectly nice men who, they're a historian. They get handed something about somebody they've never heard of before, and they're like, hey, this guy just said X about Churchill, and he's a Holocaust denier. Write up an article, debunking him and attacking him. And they do it because that's what you're supposed to do to a Holocaust denier. And that's fine. I mean, they're I would probably have believed a lot of the stuff about me too if it wasn't happening to me. So I don't really hold a grudge on that. But to go back to like what I was actually talking about in that interview last year, my whole point on that, Tucker wanted to talk about Churchill. You didn't want to talk about the Holocaust. You didn't want to talk about like the overall narrative of World War II. You wanted to specifically talk about Churchill, and it came up at dinner the night before. And I told him, basically, my point with Churchill was that I held him responsible, partly responsible, not entirely responsible, but partly responsible for escalating the war from a German-Polish war that was more or less wrapped up before it even got started, to a continent-wide global war that destroyed Europe and left half of it taken over with by the Soviet Union. And my point with it was that the answer that people always give on this is, well, you can't trust anything that Hitler or the Germans were saying. They're liars. They lied before, and all that stuff is true. They had lied before. They'd humiliated Chamberlain. When Hitler went into Prague after promising Chamberlain he wasn't going to do it, and he did it anyway. It made him look like an absolute fool, like just humiliated the only person in Europe who was like trying to actively avoid going to war with Germany, and he just humiliated him. And so those people are right that there's reason to doubt it. My whole point was just that there were potential off ramps to the greatest catastrophe that has hit Europe and the world ever in history. And so if there were potential off ramps, and Churchill and the British establishment in general, like personalizing it a little too much by just blaming Churchill, if they actively avoided those off ramps rather than exploring them, then you have to hold them at least partially responsible for that,
Right.
And the second point I was making was about just the tactics that he employed, even very early in the war, with the hunger blockade and the firebombing of civilian sites, of natural sites, the Black Forest, places like this in Germany, essentially terror attacks that we know from now declassified conversations between Churchill and the rest of the British cabinet, that they were specifically doing things to try to provoke Germany to commit atrocities against the British in London and other places, to inflame public opinion in the United States, because they understood perfectly well that they were never going to reinvade Europe and go conquer Berlin themselves. They needed the Soviets and the Americans or the Americans to come do it for them. And so their whole war strategy after the summer of 1940 was, how do we get the USSR and America into this war? Which, when you think about it, is really, how do we take a war that is basically wrapped up right now? It's wrapped up in a way that we don't like, but no armies are in the field getting shot right now. Northern Europe, Western Europe is bagged up. There's still a non-aggression pact in the East with the Soviet Union. All that's bagged up. The British have been thrown off the continent. There's some fighting in Greece. There's some fighting in North Africa. But in general, like the large-scale fighting in Europe is mostly over. And the Germans are saying, at least, that they want to put a pin in this thing. And so to refuse to do that, and then to engage in, again, terror bombing, starvation blockade, doing things when you have no path to victory except for luring these other two superpowers onto the continent that will inevitably lead to the destruction of Europe. I mean, the US and USSR get involved. You're talking about the destruction of Europe at that point, and that's what happened. And I just think that that's kind of an indefensible and dishonorable thing to do. And so, talking about the starvation blockade, the second thing I said that people got really upset about, and this is where the Holocaust denial part comes in, and this is also the part that, when you were talking about, like, I could have been clearer, and you're definitely right, I definitely could have. I was making the point that Churchill was being told by international relief organizations, neutral country aid organizations, his own people. Herbert Hoover was over there screaming in his ear, telling him that the continent is on the brink of starvation as a result of this. Germans are not going to starve. The German army is not going to starve. Like, they're going to be the first ones in line to get food, and it's going to be the people that the Germans think the absolute least of, people like the Jews, the Gypsies, etc., that when there's no food left, guess who's not getting fed? It's going to be the most vulnerable people, the people they can't get work out of, and the people that, they have a grudge against, or have, just a negative racial opinion of. And so he was being told this, and he refused. You had, international relief organizations. Hoover is great about this in his book. Talks about how they're telling him, look, we've got it arranged with neutral countries, with the Germans' approval, that they're going to let neutral Sweden or other neutral countries manage the distribution of food to the conquered populations here, to make sure all this kind of stuff, and they just refuse to do it. And so I mentioned how in August of 1941, shortly after Barbarossa, when the Germans had moved into the Soviet Union, and they're just taking millions of prisoners. I mean, really, really fast. They're overrunning the Soviet positions, taking prisoners, taking POWs, but also a lot of civilian prisoners, people they think are potential subversives, either racially or politically. And they get in there, and they never even thought about, how are we going to feed and clothe and look after and take care of all of the prisoners we take. I made the point, and I actually said this explicitly right at the beginning of it, that, look, even if you take the most generous possible interpretation of the Germans' actions, if you are a Holocaust denier, if you're the dude who's wearing the Iron Cross logo on your leather jacket as you walk down the street, and you don't care, like, you're that guy, even you have to admit that when you go into a country, you invade a country by choice, they didn't attack you first, you attack them by surprise, you end up taking millions of prisoners, and you hold them in there, and you have no food for them, you have no clothes for them, you have no medicine, no nothing for them, and they all die. You murdered those people. The most generous possible interpretation of it, the Germans murdered all those people. So that was part of the point I was trying to make. And the second part of that, though, was there was this, I mentioned this letter that was written by an SS officer at the concentration camp near Posen. And he wrote back to the high command in Berlin and said, this is August 1941, so 2 months after the invasion of the Soviet Union. And he says, look, we got all these people here. Like, we don't have food to feed these people. Wouldn't it be, and these are his words, wouldn't it be more humane to finish them off quickly now rather than let them wait until winter and let them all starve to death slowly in the winter? And so people took that as like, oh, the Holocaust was just one big oopsie daisy. We actually, the logistics didn't work out.
Mercy.
Yeah, or that it was a big mercy killing or something. And like my point with that really, and I didn't develop this properly enough I didn't plan on talking about any of this stuff in the interview. Like, I didn't know we were going here. And so I wasn't prepared for it. My point with it was, Hitler, Himmler, people at the top, some of his, like some people, they were probably just murderous, kill all the people. Like they're just like that. But you still have to get guys like that SS officer in Posen to carry it out for you. You have to go get these guys who, a couple of years ago or just, maybe 2 years ago, were working at a factory or something, or they were school teachers, and you got to get them to actually go do it. Right. And so if you can tell them, hey, there's no food, we can't feed these people, it makes it easier for a guy like that to justify what he's doing to himself, just to rationalize what he's doing. And and so, because I just find hunger blockade, I just, maybe it's one thing if you're talking about medieval Europe and you're like besieging a castle or something like that, but I just think it's an indefensible tactic. And maybe it hits me like viscerally because, something I told you before, I think you've mentioned your audience before, being on one of the things that drove me to stop working for the Department of Defense was being on U.S. Navy ships, interdicting smugglers going into Yemen during the Saudi assault on that country, when you're reading news stories every day of children dying from starvation, from easily curable diseases, and watching the crews of these ships I was working on interdict these dhows and other small boats. And, some of them were bringing in weapons. Some of them were bringing in other supplies. Some of them were bringing in a lot of hashish, like would cross over from Baluchistan, places like that. But a hell of a lot of times we find a bunch of food and medicine. And you know what we do with it? We would just dump it in the ocean while kids like 50 miles that way are dying of just the very diseases that medicine would cure. And just watching it happen, and then watching, and I don't blame the guys for this. Like when you're in the culture, it's just, it's just the culture. But then watching the crew and the chain of command celebrate, like it was a big victory. We just interdicted another smuggler trying to bring supplies into Yemen to help these terrorists, and and it's medicine and food that could have saved a bunch of kids' lives, and we're just dumping it in the ocean. And it was one of the big reasons I walked away from the job. I couldn't justify it to myself anymore to, I couldn't justify it anymore. It was keeping me up at night. And so I just think that a hunger blockade's indefensible, man. It hits the civilians. It hits the most vulnerable civilians specifically. Churchill was being warned. He was being told. And I just, especially given the experience of the Germans in the First World War, having that happen to them again, that this was going to go down. I mean, it's one of the things that really threw people into complete total war mode, where they were just like, we have to do anything possible, no matter what it is, no matter how ruthless, no matter how, just, you have to put all that aside because we all remember what happened last time.
Yeah.
And that, and so that's it. And people can disagree with all that, but it's not Holocaust denial.
Yeah. No. And look, I was not trying to throw you under the bus on the Carlson show when I was on there, other than
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%.
Well, and look, and I'm trying to give due respect to people who honestly misunderstood, and mostly probably because they read or heard what they were told by somebody else's interpretation or selective quotation, and may or may not have actually seen the original thing. But even if they had seen the original thing, I think they could have legitimately, honestly misunderstood you, because here on one hand, you're trashing Churchill instead of Hitler, which is how this conversation is supposed to go, as far as anybody's ever heard before, right? So what the hell is up with this guy already? And then again, the starvation thing, the way you explained it, there was room there for them to, I think, misunderstand that you were saying, no, even if you were a Holocaust denier, even you would have to concede this much. They didn't get that part of it. They thought that you were minimizing it to, well, what happened was they invaded the East and then they didn't really have a plan to feed the people. So then they just put them out of their misery kind of thing. And they thought that that was your point, was, yeah, poor Germans are just misunderstood, rather, when that wasn't what you were even getting at all. But that was what they thought that you meant. So that's the only reason I even bring it up here again today, is not for whatever dishonest accusers with agendas, but for regular people with an honest opinion, so they can just hear you describe your own beliefs instead of other people describing them.
Yeah, and it's similar in a way to like you said, the fact that we're talking about Churchill instead of Hitler. Like, what are you even doing talking
Yeah.
about it in that way? To me, it's very similar to when people when you get upset about Israel bombing a Catholic church today in Gaza, and you complain about it, and they say, "Oh, well, why don't you talk about what Hamas does? Why don't you condemn Hamas?" It's like, why do I need to? Hamas is like marked for death. Like, if a Hamas member is seen anywhere that a satellite or a camera or anything can see them, like, they are killed immediately, and pretty much everybody thinks that that's perfectly fine. Like, why do I have to harp on Hamas being bad or like whatever? Like, that's it's like like when Abu Ghraib came out, I didn't say, well, yeah, but why aren't you talking about what Al Qaeda in Iraq's doing? How about that, huh? It's like, because, man, like, I'm not paying their bills. I'm not like responsible in a lot of ways for their behavior. I'm not co-signing on it politically and taking blowback due to what they're doing. I have nothing to do with that. And Al Qaeda and Hamas are not interested, in my opinion, on their behavior. You know, and so, but what the U.S. Army is doing, or what the CIA is doing, what the Israelis are doing when we're giving them our full support, financial, political, and otherwise, that does concern me. And that is like, and these are people that I expect on some level, um, ought to be speaking enough of the same language as me, that me criticizing and complaining like actually means something. And so when I'm, when you criticize Churchill for the off ramps he avoided or the tactics that he employed, and you're not talking about Hitler, it's like, dude, what else is there to say about how bad Hitler was? Like,
Yeah.
do you really need another podcast about that? Like, that's something that, but it's a ritual though. If you're going to talk about World War II, you have to go through like a
Yeah.
certain
Well, and you know what,
rhetorical ritual.
too? It's it's just with every subject now. Like, no matter what you say, immediately the job of everyone listening is to decipher the real agenda behind what you're saying and why you would try to misleadingly lead them to believe that the thing that you're trying to get them to believe. And that's the thing about everything. So, whereas you're saying, yeah, but I thought it already went without saying that we're against murder. And I thought it already went without saying that we're against Hamas. And I thought it already went without saying that we're against Hitler. Hitler of all. Yes, we're against Hitler. And you really got to say that? But then the thing is, yeah, no, exactly. Because everybody is filling in the gaps, making up all of what they think you mean to say when you say the thing that you say. And it's just unavoidable now. It's how everything is. And of course, part of it is because of all the official dishonesty, where people see all the lies and they don't know where the truth begins. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They have no idea who to judge would even try to shoot straight with them. Everything's got to be for one agenda or another. You're part of one set or another. We all know what those people are like and what they're about and that kind of deal.
Yeah,
So
there's
yeah,
a
especially on things like that, you do have to just say up front, look, man, don't misunderstand me. I say this all the time and it sucks. I don't want to pander, but it is like a decent respect to people who would misunderstand me. I don't care about Iran as such. I'm just telling you that Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Donald Trump are lying about what's going on over there. You know what I mean? Bush before them. That's all. I'm just defending the truth. I'm not defending the Ayatollah out of loyalty to the Ayatollah. But the thing is, I feel like I do have to say that Because people are like, geez, why does this guy love the Ayatollah so much? It must be for a reason, because that's where they start from. Otherwise, why would I be explaining the truth about why our government or what our government's lies about Iran even are, Just how
Yeah,
it is.
there's a, there's a, this is something that's kind of an indefensible statement in a democracy, I guess. But, one of the things I think we're kind of learning these days, ever since politics became like a 24/7 vocation of such a massive part of the population due to the internet and smartphones
Yeah.
coming along, just being something that they're engaged with all the time, you start to realize after a while that politics, it's something that even in its mild forms tends to induce like a very strong us versus them thinking. It very often leads to paranoia of various intensities, and that it's not for everybody, man. Like, you have sometimes, there have been stories, guys like, James Forrestal, other people who they're in the game, they were bred for this stuff, and they get in there and they, it's a little too much for them to handle psychologically, because it's a lot of, again, like you're putting yourself into a combative environment by nature, where people are trying to take from you and do things you don't want them to do, and you're trying to do things they don't want to do, and you're competing over the same resources. And to just take like the mass population and politicize them to the extent that we've all been politicized today, it's just not for everybody. Not everybody is psychologically cut out to be able to stay in that space and maintain a healthy balance. And, one of the things, it's kind of related to what you were talking about, how, and I don't know how we get around this, but I feel like somehow it's really at the core of like the problems we have to solve if we're going to improve any of the things that, you and I and a lot of people watching us are concerned about. Is it just seems impossible these days, like, to have a serious conversation about any issue that is important to like the establishment, right? So when we talk about Russia, Ukraine, perfect example, right? You wrote a whole book called Provoked, and the point of that was the whole thing is, it was unprovoked, aggressive war against Ukraine, unprovoked. And you say, well, wait a second here. Like, not saying he should have invaded, but let's just at least talk like adults about this, right? Like, we all remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. We all know what the Monroe Doctrine is. We all know how we would respond if this was happening in Mexico to us instead of Ukraine to them. We all in this room know that. So why is it that this person who was educated at Harvard, sitting across the debate stage from me, is going to sit there and pretend like they don't know any of that? And that to say that is repeating like Putin talking points, when even the people on their side who are in favor of them, rooting for them in the debate, even they know it. Everybody knows it. And yet we engage in this fake conversation off to the side here that just doesn't address anything real that, again, even the people on that side know is the truth. And so, it prevents you from being able to have a real discussion about anything, and that we have to figure out a way to fix that, because, yeah,
We're
it's
going to get
just,
worse, man. You got AI photographs are right on the edge of completely believable. And in many cases, I guess, even are believable. You can just fake anything now. And,
yeah, I've seen
video
I've seen ones
very
that
close
people
by.
have made of me for like articles about me and stuff. They've used AI to make pictures of me, and fortunately, so far, they're not great. They still don't quite look like me. But give it another year, man, and they're going to be able to replicate this podcast and put whatever words they want in our mouths. So
Yeah. I think they probably already can. And then, so yeah, then it's going to be you actually, before it got that bad, you already decided who you can trust. Well, I know I could trust Tom Woods. He'd never lie to me. You know what I mean? But then it's like you turn into the Tom Woods channel and you don't know if that's even really him anymore. You don't
yeah,
know if
that's
he's
why
been completely hacked and hijacked.
I've got a friend who runs a company that is dedicated to putting digital content from music, books, podcasts, things like that, putting it onto the blockchain.
Oh,
And
okay.
because then now you have a record of like, this is what I made when I made it. And if it was ever changed or altered, or if it's not on there, then it ain't me. and
Yeah.
it kind of gives you like a permanent record. And I think we're going to have to start resorting to stuff like that. I mean, because it's scary how good all that stuff's getting, man. I mean, they're going to be, you talk about like, in the past, like they would just have to plant fake news stories exaggerating atrocities or accusing Assad of, dropping chemical weapons or something. Like they had to, man, pretty soon they're going to be able to give you like all the pictures of the children crying and describing it in detail, what it was like to be there and they killed my mommy. Please save us, Mr. Trump, or whatever. They're going to be able to do that pretty soon, like really convincingly.
And we're already there. I
And
mean, with
we
the
are not ready
algorithm.
for that at all.
Yeah. I mean, we're already there with the algorithm, man. I mean, when I look at YouTube, it's all just war and stand-up comedy and vert skateboard contests, and there's just the same stuff over and over and over again because that's what I'll click on. But man, there's a whole universe of stuff on there that if I'm not thinking of it to search it, it ain't ever going to show me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the same for
Yeah.
everybody else too. So they're living in their world where they're just getting what they want to see, what they've already shown. This is what pisses me off about like Twitter, especially, is there's the thing for, for you, and then there's the just following. But following is also for you. Like it's also the same manipulated algorithm. When for you, or the following should just be everybody you're following in chronological order of their tweets, man. Just hit me with the blast. And because just because I don't like and retweet something doesn't mean I never want to see something by this guy ever again. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I hate the way it
And I
is.
mean, it's one of those things that I get the logic behind it. They're trying to design ways that provide you with the content that you want to see, and the way that they know what you want to see is what you've already engaged with, and so that's fine. Like I get it, but what it does, just what you're saying, creates these sort of self-referential loops that lock people into narratives and put them in ideological silos with other people who are just like them. And what you end up with are like cult situations, basically, where like when I was doing my Jonestown series, I did a ton of research just on cult behavior and cults in general. And one of the interesting things about it was how you take a guy like Jim Jones, right? Jim Jones was showing signs of serious destabilization very early in his life. Like when he was just getting his movement started, first opening his church, he would be talking about alien invasions and how he's getting messages from God telling him there's going to be an alien invasion and they need to, or nuclear war, and they need to prepare for that and all these things. Now, if I do that, I'm like, Scott, you gotta listen to me, dude. I had this dream last night. God came to me. It's going to be nuclear war. It's going to be aliens. We got to prepare. Like we got to build an ark. You're going to be like, all right, take a breath, buddy. Let's bring it down a notch. Should I come visit? You need to get on. I'm going to give you a call. And like, that's what would normally happen. But you take Jim Jones and you put him into this environment where there's a cult of personality built around him already. And every single person around him, when he says something like that, is like, totally, wow, we got to do something, Mr. Jones. Then it just reinforces that, because we're
And then the
social
circles of
people
people out from there. Yeah, then
Yeah.
everybody around them, they see the consensus and go, okay, well, I don't want to be on the outside of that. This is what we all believe, huh? And
Yeah, and when
next
everybody
comes in.
is agreeing about the same thing, that's where we're really going to take our primary
Yeah.
reality reference from. And so then when you meet somebody from outside the circle who they're just like, what? Alien? What are you talking about? It's like, oh, okay. I see. You're part of the you're part of it,
You're
aren't you?
against me.
And
Yeah.
it just really becomes like that. And that's really the effect that this siloing online like is really having on people. It's creating like little miniature cults around all kinds of different things. I mean, it could be, you see them building up around celebrities and sports figures where there's, people who are just, there's whole Twitter feeds that are just dedicated to hating like this
Hey,
celebrity.
wait. So listen, we only got a few minutes left, and I want to keep it at an hour because I want you to, I hope, get some rest before you have to head over there and do this thing. I know you've had rough travels getting there. And first things first, as they say. But we got to at least mention that Trump is flopping on Ukraine and sending arms there and threatening sanctions when it's clearly way too little too late. We're at the point now where essentially he's at the acceptance part of grief, I guess, or the bargaining part or whatever, in the thing, but he's learning that he can't end this war. The Russians are obviously still on the ascent and yet still far from completing their goals, which may expand as soon as they do complete them in, completing the takeover of the four provinces they've already officially annexed. We'll see how much further they want to go after that, if any. We really don't know for sure. But they're not going to deal with Trump, and they're not afraid of his new sanctions regime, which, as we've already stipulated in months and years past here, Biden already tried sending more missiles and adding more sanctions, and there's not much more they can do. And if they just do this thing with this 100% or 500% tariff on anybody who trades with Russia, America's just going to kick themselves out of the old world. They're not going to succeed in forcing China and India and everybody else to cease all trade with this country. They're just not going to. So, but then what's Trump going to do? Because he might get real upset. And then at the same time, and you can just say whatever you want about these things. And if we don't have time and we leave some on the table for next week, that's okay too. But we got major problems still going on in Syria as well, with the Israelis siding with some Druze against the bin Ladenites who are backing the Bedouins against them. And so that's an ongoing thing with ceasefires with explosions. I don't know what you call that, but it's still going on. And then, of course, Gaza. And, there's a article that was in the New York Times that's on antiwar.com today. That would be, Thursday. Yesterday's antiwar.com by the time people see this. But it's a column by Omer Bartov, who I already knew him because I quote him in my book, talking all about the Holocaust in Ukraine in World War II, and how he had covered part of that and also some of the aftermath and the erasure of the memory of the former Jewish culture there and that kind of thing. And he has this piece accusing Israel of genocide. He was born in Israel, raised there, spent half his life there. He's a professor of Holocaust studies at Brown University. And he says he was reluctant to say this. He's not Mr. Hyperbole left-wing activist in the street here. He's a professor, and he's saying, no, this may be crimes against humanity, but I'm not prepared to call it a genocide yet. And then he got to the point where, yeah, no, it is. Because the whole thing of it is it's not just killing people, it's the attempt to completely erase or destroy their civilization, their society, their country, their status as a people, and remove them. And that's what they've done by essentially destroying the entire Gaza Strip and attempting now to force them all the way out. And so it's a kind of thing where people aren't there yet. Here's your hall pass, okay? Here's an Israeli-born professor of Holocaust studies saying, look, man, I do this for a living, and yes, we're over that line now. This is exactly what happened to us, and what we are not supposed to be doing. It must come to an end right now. And so it goes along with some of those top headlines where you see on antiwar.com, which everyone should be reading every single day, Dave DeCamp and Eric Garrison, all the great work they're doing over there, that every single day the Israelis kill right around 100 Palestinians, sometimes 80, sometimes 130, whatever it is. But it's a Waco or two Wacos every single day they're in the Gaza Strip still.
Yeah. And October 7th, every 2 weeks, doing this at a time where, I think I mentioned this last time we talked about it, that there hasn't been a rocket fired out of Gaza since like April. And before that, it was rare for quite a while before that. This is not like, these aren't people who are being killed because there's heavy combat and there's collateral damage. I mean, that's not what's going on over there anymore. There is no heavy combat. Like, you occasionally have like a lone gunman or a small squad of Hamas guys that tries to ambush, an armored vehicle or something like that. But that's not what the vast majority of this stuff is from. There's no heavy combat going on. There hasn't been for some time. And so, I mean, people have this idea, I think, of like how ethnic cleansing works and even genocide, where they think that, like, just to talk about ethnic cleansing, that means like you're sending your forces door to door through every neighborhood and rounding the people up and putting them on trucks and dumping them on the other side of the border or something, or you're taking them all out to a pit and shooting them. That's not how it usually, that kind of thing, that takes a lot of manpower. It takes a hell of a lot of dedication. It's hard. It's going to be violent. You're going to take casualties. Like, what it usually means, and you can see this certainly at play here, is, you do a couple high profile atrocities, you put it out there that you could be next, your kids could be next, you burn down a lot of homes, you cut off the food and other resources people need to live, and you just harass and terrorize the people until they finally decide to leave. And even genocides, we're all sort of very used to the story of gas chambers and big pits full of people getting shot by the thousands in World War II. Even most genocides, like things when you hear about, like in the Congo, and 2 million people killed or something in a war, like the way a lot of that happens is very similar to what I just said. You go into a village, you torture and murder all the adults there, you kill all the boys who are big enough to hold a gun, you take all the girls and young boys off with you, and then you make sure that a few people escape to go tell the next village what just happened. And those people, when they hear you're coming, they all flee out into the bush. And guess what? Women and pregnant women and kids and old people, they all die the first couple days out there. And the men, are probably already in some militia or whatever. But even the men, like, will end up alone and dying, in the bush somewhere, either at human hand or environmental. Like, that's how most of these genocides work. It's not even the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in '48 worked this way. It's why the Israelis, for example, they didn't. You hear about, like, today, you hear about, like, Deir Yassin, the massacre there, and it was like a My Lai massacre, basically, style thing that happened in 1948, carried out by Israeli militias that were commanded by two future prime ministers of Israel, by the way. And today you'll get people, and you'll even see this in some books and stuff, that, it's totally exaggerated, and or it didn't even really happen. It's all made up, like by the Gaza Health Ministry or whatever, But back then, the Israelis, they were not, or the Zionists, I guess they were still at that point, they weren't shy about it. In fact, when they got to Lydda and Ramleh to clear out the 50,000 residents of those cities and send the residents of Ramleh out into the desert, where hundreds of them died along the side of the road because they had nowhere to go, no food, no water. When they were coming in and about to go into those cities, they were driving around trucks around the towns with speaker systems where they were telling everybody what happened in Deir Yassin, and you're next if you try to resist us, and if you don't do what we say, and get out of here. And so this is how ethnic cleansings usually work. They advertise the atrocities because they want you to leave. And I mean, gosh, man, I really have to think that even the Israelis have to be looking at each other just amazed at what they're getting away with right now. I mean, you're talking about, we've got daily massacres of crowds of civilians on camera. We've got soldiers giving interviews to major newspapers, commanders giving interviews to major newspapers. You've got international organizations, totally apolitical, like relief organizations, all these
Former prime
confirming
ministers, Ehud
former.
Olmert
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And,
and
you
Barack.
know, when you think back to, like, the early part of the war, when I can't remember the name of it, but they bombed those people in that hospital, and there was a full spectrum propaganda effort to deny that had happened, or that it was a mistake or whatever. There are no hospitals left in Gaza anymore,
Right.
and
Well,
they don't even. I mean, it's fine. I think there's no consequences, at least immediately. But I'm a firm believer. Call it karma, call it God's justice, whatever you want. But nobody ever really gets away with anything, and everything has a price. And you just hope, because there are a lot of great people in Israel. You just hope that price doesn't fall on a lot of people who don't deserve it, because they've crossed several red lines into a zone that, especially I can't imagine, as a Jewish person, looking back on your history of persecution leading up to the genocide, and then seeing this happen and having to sort of reconcile those two things in your mind. I mean, we know how it gets done. It's the way that everybody always does it in those situations where you have these two irreconcilable things, is you just have to brutally dehumanize the other people, and that's how you can go to bed at night knowing that you're committing a Holocaust against a bunch of helpless people, and when it happened to you and your grandparents. And so it's, talk a little bit about real quick about the Russia thing too. I think there's this thing about Trump that is like, sometimes it's kind of charming, where I guess just probably because, of his days as a Manhattan real estate deal maker guy, he thinks that everything can be kind of boiled down to personal relationships. I just got to talk to Putin, sit down across a table, look him in the eye, and then we sit down and we can just work this out. We can talk about it because I know him, he'll know me. And, when he goes over to North Korea and he's shaking hands with Kim Jong-un and they're walking across that line back and forth, that's good. It actually works there. That was actually an improvement in our relations, and it brought things down, to a lower temperature. But when you're talking about Russia, you're talking about a major power, that has been led, like just strung along and drawn into a conflict that they didn't want and didn't plan for, that has cost them, I mean, who knows how many casualties they've actually taken, but it's a lot. And it's way more than anything we've experienced, at least since World War II and probably before that. And that at this point, like they're not conducting foreign policy based on Vladimir Putin's personal relationship with Donald Trump. They're done with all of that shit. And they're like, these decisions have already been made. The way this war ends is we win, and we put ourselves in a position where we feel confident that you can't decide in 2028 when whoever gets elected that you want to restart this thing again. It's just our only option.
It really is just unfortunate, the timing and the way they're fighting this war of attrition. If they had finished taking Zaporozhye and Kherson last November, this wouldn't be an issue, right? But Trump just got sworn in for his second term at the wrong time. And I think he really was sincere, but you're right. There's just no way that he's going to talk Putin into stopping short of those lines where he's not at. And Putin says, oh, yeah, no, we can make peace. That's fine. But the Ukrainians have to withdraw their forces from Zaporozhye, the entire areas of Zaporozhye and Kherson, which is like a half to a third of those territories, or a third to a half, I should say, which they're not going to do. Of course, they're not going to give in and leave. So it's just, but then the problem is Trump's just going to get mad then. If he can't get what he wants here, now he's going to try to escalate and send in weapons, which is just going to make matters worse. Maybe prolong the thing, maybe not even prolong it, maybe not even make that much of a difference other than just helping to sour the relationship with Russia even further. And as you say, he ain't going to last anyway. He's only got 3 more years, and then it's going to be somebody else. It could be a Democrat or Lindsey Graham's choice, to replace him. And so we don't know. It could be Marco Rubio be the president. So why, if you're the Russians and you got to place your bets, you're going to place your bets on the permanent establishment, not the rogue who sometimes means well,
Yeah, exactly. And, that's the worst part probably about it is the Russians, man, they're not going to forgive us for 100 years for this. And it's too bad because this is not some joke of a country that you can push around. And we found that out, with the sanctions, with the military situation, it's just not. So
same thing with Iran. And we don't have time to talk about this, but maybe we'll put this off for next time. But I keep hearing everybody talk about the short and successful war with Iran there, led by Israel, where America chipped in at the end. And yet I think all of the issues outstanding there remain unresolved, whatever damage was inflicted on those sites. And so, they said Iraq War I was short and sweet too, but we've been bombing Iraq for 34 years since then. So Operation Decisive Storm in Yemen is that same one that you were talking about in year 8 of it. You're over there watching guys dump their medicine in the water. So we'll see how that goes. And I don't know the very latest updates from the progress there. Jesus Christ. I'm live on the thing here. Thanks very much.
We got to wrap it up here in a second. I got to piss.
I was just trying to finish that sentence and I was going to be done, whatever the hell I was talking about. You could splice this shit, Chris, I hope. I don't know exactly what is the status of what they do have left at Natanz and Fordo and the rest, or how quickly they'll be able to get their nuclear program back up and running again. But it's clearly not all the way over yet. And so,
yeah, let's put a pin in that one and pick that up next week.
Yep, absolutely. All right, get some rest and have a great time, and don't go too far off on too many tangents now. And you stick to your story there, and I know you'll be great, and can't wait to watch. We'll all be watching. All right, see you, buddy. Thanks, everybody.